Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. Greetings. Welcome. Hi, everyone who's joining. Greetings. Greetings. Thanks so much for being here. It's 12 o'clock right now, so I'm going to officially start because I do have to make this a little bit of a shorter webinar. I have something right after this, so I'm going to make sure that I have some time to settle in and wind down before I start my next event. So with that being said, let me welcome everyone to yet another one of our Dish with Dina monthly webinars. These wellness webinars are always free to attend. And I think today we had about 25 total registrants signed up. A lot of people sometimes will not attend live. The recording is always made available to anybody who registers. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means when you register for one of these events. So on that note, let me begin our presentation. Thanks again for joining. So obviously I'm Dina D'Alessandro. I'll introduce myself a little bit more formally shortly. These are some of the objectives that I hope you take with you when we're done with this webinar. Every month, we have a different topic, and there's always so much more that I can share and include, but sometimes it can be quite overwhelming. So obviously I want to make sure that you're getting a taste of something, and then we can always revisit some of these topics in future discussions. Some housekeeping rules here. As those of you who know, and you just entered into the webinar, you heard the sound that this session is being recorded, because like I said, if people cannot attend live, which is totally fine, they can access this later on through a recording link, and that is available to you lifelong. I never take these off. As a matter of fact, I save the recording, and in a couple of months, I actually upload these to my YouTube channel, to the Dish with Dina YouTube channel, and make it available publicly at that point. You can use the chat box at any time. I'm doing this on my own, so I don't have anyone else here moderating or co-facilitating with me. So I will do my best to check the chat often as I advance through the slides, but we also have some time at the very end of the presentation where we have more of a formal Q&A. I always like to say I am a registered dietitian, not your registered dietitian. So please make sure that you take away from these webinars just education, information. I like preparing these to kind of provide you with or empower you with the language and the knowledge that you might need if this is a condition or something you're curious about that you are currently seeking healthcare assistance with, or if you're not sure of how to use the language, then hopefully the takeaways from this webinar and any of the other ones that we have available to you make you feel a little bit more knowledgeable and have the information that you need when you are looking either online to be able to collect and disseminate information, or share with your doctor any of the language that hopefully you take away from here. So obviously, with that said, this is not medical advice. Make sure that you are reaching out to your healthcare providers, seeking their assistance if you decide to start or stop or continue anything that you're currently doing, like medications or different food modifications or starting up a physical activity program. Any of those things should be cleared first by your doctor. Now, so what I said before too, even if you're not attending live, you're watching this as a recording, anyone who registers for our programs, our webinars, etc., we do collect your email information and we do put that through our distribution list. So as it is right now, I'm only sending out a monthly newsletter, which is maybe where some of you already received the link to this to join up. If not, you can always opt out because we don't want you to feel like you're being spammed in any way. Obviously, we want to be respectful of your inboxes, but just to disclaim and disclose that that is how we use your information, just to collect info, or I should say emails, and so that we can follow up with you after the fact. We also send out a link after every one of our webinars for your feedback. So the information on there asks you to share what you thought about this, how we might be able to improve. And we also ask if there are any other topics that you would like to see us dive a little deeper into in the future. So with that being said, let me formally introduce myself to those of you who might not know who I am. I'm Dish with Dina on the social media internet world. I'm Dina D'Alessandro, registered dietitian and nutritionist. This is a second career for me. I started about 8 years ago, but going back to school for this profession. And I am very fortunate with the amount of experience and opportunities that have been given to me since then, such as, and I know a lot of you who register for and attend these webinars and some of the other things that I do, you have worked with me in these capacities. So I'm an adjunct lecturer of undergraduate and graduate nutrition studies over at the CUNY Lehman College campus up here in the Bronx in New York City, where I am based. I'm also the on-campus dietitian there at the Student Health Center. So I go once a week and I meet with all the students during the spring and the fall semesters. As I said, I'm the founder of Dish with Dina, which is basically a virtual platform to share knowledge, information, guidance, and content with everyone across a lot of different things, such as my YouTube channel, my social media accounts, and I also have a podcast. And then I also have some specialties too. So I worked with high risk pregnant populations way back when I first started. So I had a lot of experience doing that. I'm also a CDC trained lifestyle coach to help people prevent type 2 diabetes. I've also been very fortunate to be involved in a variety of different things like research projects and interviews and panel discussions. So again, maybe you've seen me from there and got some information and you thought that was cool. And that's how you found me here. So whatever brings you here, thanks so much for joining me. Those of you who've been following and coming to these webinars consistently, you might remember back in, I think, late November, early December, we had a SMART Goals webinar. So even if you didn't come to that, that's totally fine. I just want to do a quick mid-year check-in at the time of this webinar, at the time of this recording. It is currently July. We are entering into the second half of the year. And if you feel like sharing in the chat, you can. If not, just something to consider. What were some of the things that you had thought about doing as the new year kicked in from 2024? And now here we are entering into the second half of the year, July. And yes, I realize time is a social construct, so nothing really matters. But as far as like linearly speaking and chronologically speaking, what are some of the things that you thought you might have accomplished by now, or some things that you wanted to undo that you're still doing, some things you wanted to have learned more about that you didn't quite get to, or some accomplishments that you have and that you're grateful for? Just give that a quick thought. For me, I'll disclaim a couple of things on my end. Lots of things that I was juggling. Unfortunately, I'm dealing with some medical conditions that are just taking a lot longer for me to address and manage. So those things are not preventing me from doing some of the other things that I had on my list, but it's just a little challenging to work around, as I'm sure a lot of you have your own responsibilities and own things that you're taking care of. And right, we juggle a lot of things. So I'm trying to show myself some compassion and some grace and saying all in good time and trying not to get too stressed out over the things that I haven't yet checked off my list or seem to be taking a little bit longer for me to accomplish and address. And maybe that's something that you might be considering too. If you feel like you're a little bit behind schedule, hopefully this gives you the permission to take and give yourself some grace in that as well. Okay, moving in. Whoops, there I go. I just lost my little cursor. So moving on to our current discussion about inflammation. As I mentioned, kind of as I was leading into this discussion, it's a bit of a tricky conversation to have, and I'll share obviously more as the slides progress. But just to give you a general definition of what is inflammation in general, it is our body just tries to protect us at all costs. So it's our body's natural response to something that is going on, whether it's an infection or an injury or some sort of pollutant or toxic issue happening. It's part of our immune system, and it allows our body to keep us from harm and make sure that we are healing from that. So those of you who've also come to some of the other webinars about the gut health discussion, your gut, the lower part of your gastrointestinal system, that small intestine, is really working hard to make sure that you are protected from any significant damage, and that is where your immune system is basically based, but so is your immune system found in a lot of your nervous system as well, your nervous organs and so on. So I'm going to share a little bit of information here too, and I'm going to ask you just to forgive me because I usually try to simplify my language, but in the case of what I'm sharing with you here, it's just very difficult for me to do that. So I thought a couple of things about this. Number one, like I said before, I like to share with you information that makes you feel empowered. And number two, this is also language that your doctors or other healthcare providers might be using. And from what I've been seeing a lot on certain commercials as well, whether they are talking about pharmaceuticals, medicines, treatment plans, etc., for specific conditions, I've heard some of this language come up there as well. So I just want to clarify and define some of the things that might be of interest to you, but are also specifically related to inflammation, and that is your inflammatory cells. I kind of picture them as a little army marching out, little, I don't know what army statuses, generals, sergeants, I don't know who they are, but they're coming out and they're helping fight any issues that are going on in our body. So our neutrophils are the first responders, kind of like the EMT showing up to something that is being called, and they are the first responders. They engulf and destroy the pathogen. So anything that is causing harm to us, they try to chew them up and spit them out. Our monocytes and macrophages, those are going to be like our house cleaning crew. They come in and they kind of clear out any of that debris, and they help start stitching us up, for lack of a better term. They help repairing any of the damage that might have been done in the cellular or tissue repair. And then on the right-hand side, let me just get my little things out of the way here. On the right-hand side, we have eosinophils and basophils. This is bringing me back, by the way, to like my first classes in biology. And if any of you are in the health sciences, maybe you're getting some memories on this as well of what we learned back in the whole anatomy and physiology discussion and biology discussion. But these are cells that help combat some of the more important kind of concerns. So they combat things like parasites, if we have any parasitic infections, and they also are responsible for releasing histamine, specifically here during an allergic reaction. So again, if those of you had attended, I think one of our last seminars or webinars was on food allergies and food intolerances, you might remember this word histamine. That is when your immune system is kind of, responding to or acting to some of these potential irritants, and it's releasing these chemicals within your bloodstream to fight that symptom, to fight that infection. And in the case of an allergy, that is more of an autoimmune response. So it's a little bit more severe, so that it keeps you from, kind of having a fatal reaction to that. So here again, I just want to share the definition between the two things. This was one of those objectives that I mentioned earlier in the webinar about what's the difference? What's the difference between this word acute and chronic? Well, acute inflammation is something that is going to happen in a very isolated situation, whether it's the actual isolated area, like you got a paper cut or you walked into poison ivy and there's a reaction or response happening right then and there, or if you're dealing with a particular a condition that is happening that is short term. So like a 3-day virus or something like that, where you might notice a fever, some redness, maybe swelling in a particular area that is being affected. This situation could last a few hours, right? Over and done with, like a paper cut, whatever, you're kind of done. You put a Band-Aid on it, Neosporin, you forget about it. Or this might take a few days rather, to make sure that your body has processed and gotten rid of those irritants. When these things become more severe and more long lasting, that is when we term it chronic. So these are things that can last for months or for years, depending on what disease state or what condition you're dealing with. It can also affect, which we'll see coming up soon, the entire body. So all of the systems that are in place, our organs, our brain, etc. And it can also end up affecting healthy cells, tissues, and organs. So it's spreading kind of like wildfire here. And because of that, then it is also linked to many diseases. And here's where I just want to clarify something too, that as I've learned more about inflammation, and specifically chronic inflammation, it's kind of bidirectional, meaning that if you have an acute situation where you're dealing with an inflammatory issue and your body does not have the immune system power to clear out what is going on, so it's failure to eliminate whatever those toxins are happening or whatever is going on, bacterial infections, viral infections, etc., those defenses are not doing what they're supposed to do. They're kind of weakened in that sense, and so we're ending up with a lot more damage than we would normally have if we had a stronger immune system or stronger ability to fight that particular infection, disease state, etc. So that could be a defect in the cells. It could be because of lifestyle habits that are affecting your overall immune system. Whatever the case may be, that situation can lead to inflammation, chronic inflammation, and then chronic inflammation can then lead to what I'm going to share with you here on this slide, which is, I apologize, a little hard to see. So I'm going to actually read through some of these different kinds of systems that are in our body and how that chronic inflammation, if it is not managed, and we'll talk a little bit too about treatments and management shortly, that what it can lead to going forward. Things like your brain can be affected because, and I also want to just clarify to define something, another word that pops up in here, a cytokine. A cytokine is another one of those inflammatory cells, just depends on where they are in the body. So this is language again for you to be used to or just getting aware of in case this comes up in your discussions with your doctors. But where that can affect your brain is it can end up having something as simple as brain fog or depression or other mental health issues or things like Alzheimer's disease and maybe even things like MS. There's autism is listed in here, but I didn't really see a lot of research that specifically can say this equals that. And I think as maybe even just a disclaimer as I'm walking through some of these body systems that are being affected, one of the themes that comes up a lot in these webinars is how much of too much is anything. So it's more of a matter of the stress that is placed on our body and how our body decides on the duration of that before it kind of flips the switch on or off. So if you are already dealing with some sort of impairment or issue or disability or again weakened immune system, your body might be more prone to something having being taking place a little bit quicker and further along. There may be somebody who is not as susceptible to those things. Okay, moving on to the cardiovascular system. Here is something like it can lead to different heart diseases, stroke, even something not as super fatal, but something like anemia. So that is affecting your blood as well. Muscle issues, carpal tunnel, rheumatoid arthritis, anything that affects that muscle system can be of concern as well. And then as you can see, there are two bones, skin, thyroid. If you remember back, I think in January or February, we talked about thyroid functions and hormones. So again, just laying the groundwork that this can be related to a lot of things. Our body acts as one unit, but it also is very interrelated and interdependent on a variety of different factors. Going through with lungs and respiratory system, we have things like allergies or asthma can be an issue. The gut is super sensitive, as I'm sure you've heard me saying a lot of different webinars, that there could be chronic inflammation. And because the cells within our gastrointestinal tract are very sensitive. They turn over at a very quick rate. So if one of them gets damaged and is not taken care of, it can spread pretty quickly. So you can see things like upper esophageal cancers taking place or GERD, which is kind of like heartburn, right? The gastroesophageal reflux disease. Crohn's disease, which also happens in the upper part of the gut as well, or celiac disease, or lower small intestinal type of conditions too. So everything is kind of related here, right? Kidneys, you're looking there as well with kidney disease or edema and liver conditions too. This is not to scare anybody. This is one of the things I think that happens a lot of times when I try to educate people. It might put the fear in them that, oh my gosh, everything that I'm doing is wrong. But just consider how much you are maybe in control of. And as we go through some of the future slides too, we'll see where you might be able to make some modifications to reduce or alleviate any of the possible risk factors that might happen that you are within, that's within your control. And then anything that might not be in your control, I mean, the best things we can do is talk to our doctors, see how we can manage these things. One of the ways, or I should say two of the ways that we've really officially diagnosed chronic inflammation is through these two blood tests here that you see on screen. So again, I'm sharing this with you because these are not necessarily, I don't think, part of a regular metabolic panel, like when you just go get a blood test, for your physical exam. It's possible that if you are dealing with conditions, if you feel like you can't recover from something, if you feel like you've been going on and just feeling overall achy or something is not right, that you can then inquire with your doctor if you can get a CRP or an ESR. So these are two blood tests that are done that show the amount of inflammation running over the course of your body, different kinds of sensitivity levels, etc. And then depending on the range, yes, high inflammation, low inflammation, you might end up saying, okay, let's give it another 3 months, maybe make some minor adjustments, maybe go on some medicine or something like that that might be short term, and then come back and test it again. Because as you saw in the previous slide where we defined acute versus chronic inflammation, we said that chronic inflammation doesn't have to last your life. It could just last maybe a handful of months or a couple of years, and then you kind of overcome it ideally. All right, so let's go through here some of the other risk factors. So we said if an acute inflammation or some other underlying issue is not taken care of properly, it can turn into chronic inflammation. Other things that can potentially cause chronic inflammation are just getting older. I mean, we're all there, right? Just by nature, our body has some wear and tear. there, our clock is ticking, and we're not as maybe highly functioning with trying to fend off some of our diseases. And as we enter into our senior and older years, we are automatically categorized as immunocompromised because of the fact that our body might be undergoing multiple things happening at once, and or we might be at that point being put on a regimen of a lot of medicines that are also kind of suppressing our ability to fight off infection and so on. So under age, I just wanted to clarify or define one more term that you see there, mitochondrial dysfunction. The mitochondria is what is known as our powerhouse of our cells. It helps us with giving us energy. So it's part of the process of when we eat, and then we can use that energy to do something. So it's called the powerhouse of the cell. And the functions that the mitochondria are in charge of are regulating growth functions and signaling things like metabolism. Like I just said, you eat something, your body has to do something with that food, and it sends it off on its way. So it's a kind of a big deal. So if we end up with dysfunction because of the wear and tear process of getting older, it makes sense that that would put us at more risk for chronic inflammation. Body composition too. So this is one of those things that I try to be really sensitive about, just because people are in larger size bodies or might have excess fat on them than what is deemed quote unquote socially acceptable or categorized as healthy or normal in the clinical world, doesn't always mean that they are metabolically unhealthy. Just like somebody in a smaller or thin sized body is going to naturally be healthy, right? There's a lot of underlying factors, but there has been research out there that says there could be a correlation depending on excess fat, body fat percentage could be linked to a higher risk of certain inflammatory issues or chronic conditions. So again, it's not just the one thing, the one factor is going to make or break you. It's is all of this stuff happening at the same time and putting you more at risk. So maybe one thing, you're aging, but you don't smoke or you don't drink. Okay, so maybe that puts you like 1 to 3% higher risk factor. Maybe you can live with that. But if all of these things are you're dealing with right now, that can put you in a 20 or 30% risk factor category. So again, just kind of using your, your analysis, your critical analysis, and understanding that hopefully it's not scaring you, just things to keep an eye on or to monitor. Diet, we're going to talk a little bit more about in the slides coming up. So specifically, three things that have been shown to be associated with chronic inflammation are the excessive, okay, keep that word in mind, excessive intake of things like saturated fats, trans fats, and refined sugars. So I'm going to go a little bit more in detail in that shortly. Top right, tobacco and alcohol. Kids, if we haven't learned anything by now, smoking's not great, right? So please, if you are a smoker, try not to be anymore. I am a self-proclaimed and professed former smoker. It took me many years to quit. I think I smoked for 23 on and off 23 years of my life. I never thought I would pick up a cigarette once, and once I did, I could not stop smoking. So 23 years of my life I smoked, and I think it took me about 4 years to completely stop, where I never took a cigarette again. And now I believe it's been 12 years since my last cigarette. So I applaud myself for that, but I also recognize that my body is still in a state of repairing. Some of my bodily systems are still kind of suffering the consequences of the damage that I did to them when I was a smoker, and some of my body has sort of started healing. Like I can feel a little bit better about breathing, but I still feel my stamina is not as where I want it to be. Alcohol too. So I have, you're gonna forgive me because I keep looking down because I do have some notes in front of me just to remember how to clarify some things. So alcohol is one of those things that it feels kind of contradictory when we look at the research that's out there. Yes, when we encourage people to follow something like the Mediterranean diet as like the end all be all, holistic, healthful approach to foods, wine is part of that discussion, like having moderate intake of red wine. It is possible that in, as we define it, moderation, like maybe a 4-ounce glass of wine at the end of every night, or however many days a week, it's possible that it could be protective against inflammation and be heart protective. So it has some heart protective effects in there. However, a lot of the research that I've read through and I've shared with a lot of you too on some of the past webinars is that It's a known carcinogen. Unfortunately, alcohol can cause cancer. So if you are not moderating it, if you do drink in excess, again, however you deem that or define that might be not up to you in your brain, but up to your body in itself, saying this is how much is too much and now my cells are being affected by that. It can cause inflammation and can lead to other more serious conditions. So the rule of thumb is really, if you don't drink, don't start. And if you are drinking, try to really scale back on that, just because the pros don't necessarily outweigh the cons in this discussion. Hormone health, hormones are very sensitive. So, all of this is related to our thyroid and a lot of things that we talked about in the beginning of the year with one of our previous webinars, which, by the way, if you want to go back and watch that, you can go onto the Dish with Dina YouTube channel and check out more about our hormone health discussions. But any kind of low levels or abnormal levels of anything can offset our body's way of being in balance. And that can end up spiking up or suppressing any of these pro-inflammatory markers, as they're called. So it can cause our inflammation reactions to happen. Stress and sleep. Okay, so yes, I'm a dietitian, but I will always, always, always have a conversation around stress and sleep, because we have seen in so many different conditions and so many different mental health and physical situations that stress and sleep play a huge role in helping us keep things at bay. So if you are, like a lot of you are who follow me here, if you are entrepreneurs, if you're juggling a million things, if you are students who are cramming for all-nighters, if you have to, super busy doing whatever is stressing you out and maybe also keeping you from sleeping quality and quantity wise, keeping you having a good night's sleep, those things are going to add up, my friends. So please make sure, have that discussion with yourself, set boundaries with yourself and with others. Make sure that you're prioritizing your stress and sleep levels. Maybe you do that through journaling or prayer or physical activity, and also setting up some bedtime routines or early morning schedules for yourself that you have to start winding down by a certain time. All of that is really interrelated, and things like that can set off your inflammatory markers. So just be conscientious about that. Okay, so left to right here, right? I said earlier, just in that slide before, the diet discussion of saturated fats, trans fats, and refined sugars. We're going to define those a little bit, kind of very simply here. Saturated fats are oils, or technically lipids, right? So these are lipids as far as our macronutrients are concerned. We have carbohydrates, we have proteins, and we have fats. So fats come in a variety of different forms. As far as a saturated fat is concerned, in its molecular structure, it is easily defined as something that you can notice is solid at room temperature. So something like the veining in a piece of meat, the marbling in a piece of meat, things that would not, we would normally maybe recommend that you take off the skin, the underlying fat, or any of the fat around the particular piece of meat that you're going to eat before you eat it. So that is a saturated fat. But saturated fat is also found in plant-based things as well. Something like coconut oil. So if you love coconut oil, I love coconut oil as for whatever, if you're using it as a skincare product or in your hair or you're cooking with it, when you keep coconut oil outside at room temperature, it still is a solid. So these things could be more prone to causing us to have issues with our arteries and maybe, again, exacerbating the conditions around the heart disease discussion. And they are technically considered inflammatory foods. So we'll go through some of these things and we'll try to come up with an idea or an approach as to what do we do, right? We're not going to try to take everything away from you, but how we kind of mix and match some of these foods are going to be what the next steps might be. Trans fats. So trans fats are they naturally occur in some foods, but they're also known as artificial forms, as partially hydrogenated oils. Now, the good news here, the trans fats that are naturally occurring are not probably as much or as problematic. The artificial form, the partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, in 2015, the United States has banned these. The United States government reviews a lot of different foods and drugs and so on, and they say, in certain amounts, things are generally recognized as safe. However, due to updated research, they decided, you know what, we were wrong about that. And so instead of even saying, hey, let's limit trans fats in our diet, we're just going to say people are not allowed to use it anymore. So the FDA gave food manufacturers and also places like restaurants too that might deep fry something as well, but in particular food manufacturers, they gave them 3 years between 2018 to 2021 to completely eliminate trans fats from their food supply. And they had to extend some of the things because, COVID, et cetera, kind of knocked things off there as far as the process is concerned. And food manufacturers, when they cannot use one thing, they have to figure out how to substitute it with something else. So some of those something else's uh, we may come to find in future times that maybe those are also not as great. So this is why we're going to talk a little bit too about highly processed foods in a second, but this is why we always try to be conscientious about, where are we getting our food, try to be educated about where our food is coming from, what's in it, ingredients, et cetera, where who's manufacturing it, and seeing if that in fact does play a role in your eating habits and your medical conditions. On the right hand side there, refined sugars. So these are, again, the refining of something, the stripping away of the nutritional value of something in order to, in this case, add more palatability, the sweeten factor to something. So here too, this is also where in some of my discussions with people I work with, I will say things like, I'd rather you have a table sugar versus an artificial sweetener, because the processing of it, it feels like it's so taken away from its quote unquote natural form that your body just doesn't know what to do with it. But in the case of what you see on screen here, corn in itself is fine. But when we start stripping away the corn and processing it into a refined sugar, corn sugar, or high fructose corn sugar as an example as well, sugar beets on their own, that is just a plant. But again, extracting the sugar from it and breaking it down and processing it in that sense as well. So sugar beets are also an issue too, and sugar cane is where we also get sugar too. So we're taking a plant and we're stripping away the whatever nutritional value is. And obviously, it's for a reason, right? Like that's how we have baked goods, and not all refined sugar is going to cause an issue, but it's more a matter of like how much is too much of anything, as I said before. So let's go into our, whoops, let me, once again, my little window is in my way here. Apologies if you are seeing me on screen, kind of like moving, moving around my cursor. There we go. Okay, so let's go into think around the discussion of stripping things away. A lot of times we'll also hear the term of processed foods or highly processed foods or ultra processed foods. And I really want to just define this, take a couple of minutes to define this as well. First of all, I do not want to vilify any foods, meaning I don't ever want you to feel like you're a bad person or the choices that you are making are bad, because people, there's a reason for everything, right? We're all not out there picking things off of trees. We might not have the access to or the finances for everything that is in the hierarchy of the best foods possible. We might not be able to eat organic. That is okay. But once again, we're looking at kind of the opposite ends of the extreme. So here is a great example I love giving all the time. Processed foods, how things are processed. On the left-hand side, you have an easily recognizable cob of corn, right? That's an ear of corn, 4 ears of corn. I can see that in a cornfield, but it's not technically in the field anymore, right? We yanked it off the cornfield. We pulled the husk out from around it. That is technically a form of processing. It's not as going through an extreme measure to turn it into something else just yet, but it is technically a form of processing. I've pulled it, plucked it, and I've brought it into a factory, packaging it and sending it into the grocery store. That middle picture is now we've processed the corn even further. We've taken the kernels off of it. Maybe we've boiled it down or treated it in some way to either be canned or frozen. And we've packaged it in a way that is shelf stable to be used at a later time, because now this becomes more of a convenience food. So this is a canned item picture here, which I use canned items too. Sometimes I don't have the time to be using things straight out of its natural form or its whole food form and manipulating it myself. On the right hand side, now you have the more extreme version. You've taken that corn, you've pulverized it, you've added other things to it, maybe salt and fat and different kinds of additives to that, and now it's become a corn chip. So if we take a look at all three of these things, they can all fit into a well-rounded and well-balanced diet. But if you are always relying on the things that are kind of stripped away nutritionally, and you're giving your body that need of having to kind of fight that inflammation, I would want to hopefully see you work with somebody that can help you figure out how to get a better balance of your diet and what maybe can be done if you are unable to either access things, be it location wise or finances wise, if there are ways that you might be able to um, get some resources available for you. So, of course, as always, you can always email me after the fact or respond to the survey link when it comes to you. If you are struggling, we can try to see if we can get some resources out to you, because we we don't want you to end up exacerbating a condition that you feel you don't have any control over. But anyway, my point about all of this is how much of too much is anything. And even in the case of processed foods, how much is too much of anything in this sense as well. So if you feel like you're kind of going left and middle and left and right and left and middle, like, 80-20 split, like 80% of the time you're kind of in that left and middle section, and maybe 10 to 20% of the time you're more on the right hand side. Hopefully that feels good and realistic for you. And that might, again, reduce your risk of having to deal with any kind of chronic inflammation issues. All right, treatment plan. So I'm just going to disclaim here too. I'm not a pharmacist and I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't go too into detail into any of these things. I just like to share with everybody when we talk about specifically these condition related webinar topics, just to give you some insight into what your treatment options might be with working with a doctor and also with a dietitian. Just because you have a chronic condition that may or may not be managed by making lifestyle modifications doesn't mean that you might have to be put on medicine short term or long term. Sometimes that's just the name of the game. But with anything, with any kind of treatment that you're taking in, obviously, please make sure you're always asking about the long term or even short term results or side effects that can happen. And if you are dealing with any interactions, if you're already taking some supplements or other medications to begin with when you're put on these next things. So you have NSAIDs, which I think a lot of us are very familiar with. These are things like ibuprofen and naproxen. And most medicines, right, most pharmaceuticals are either going to what we call metabolize, meaning they're going into your system either through your kidney or through your liver. So these are things, again, over the course of time, could that also provide you with some sort of inflammatory state where now your body is more sensitive to and less strong immune response to having to be able to fight any further conditions from happening because it's being weakened by the medicines. These are things that I want you to ask your doctors as well. Corticosteroids, such as prednisone, these are things that suppress the immune system. We just got done talking about your immune system is very sensitive and very important. So if you're trying to reduce inflammation by taking something like like an NSAID or a corticosteroid, you're suppressing the immune system. You're trying to make sure, okay, we want that fighting action to stop. So by doing so, you're also now more prone to having something else happen further. So again, we might not want to be on these things long term. I have a perfect example. I have a skin issue that I was just taking care of, and my doctor did put me on steroids, topical treatment of steroids, and 2 weeks was the tops. She's like, a very, very thin layer, 2 weeks you're done, because these are very, very strong, potent medicines, and we don't want you on more than you need to be. We also have something called disease modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, so like rheumatoid arthritis, right? This is joint inflammation. So you might be put on these things too. Again, they could be long-term or short-term, depending on, and so also I think they treat autoimmune conditions too, like lupus, and other conditions that I can't think of just yet. We also have things called biologics. So the TNF stands for, again, another long description of something called a tumor necrotic factor. So these are all involved in inflammation and the responses of suppressing your inflammatory response. So that is called a TNF inhibitor, meaning it's stopping the natural pathway, the natural feedback that your body's trying to do. It stops it from happening to allay. So those things I saw come up in things like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, even IBD, inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. That's kind of like an umbrella term. I think if you remember the gut discussion we had a few months ago, that came up as well. So again, those medications might be given to you to treat those particular things. We also have going on the bottom three bullets, right? Some of the more kind of like newer things that we see coming up, like CBD oils or CBD cannabidiol could potentially treat chronic inflammation. Sometimes this is also used for people undergoing cancer treatments as well. So there could be some anti-inflammatory properties there, including things like pain relief, and it's being studied a lot too. So we're seeing some research evidence. However, it looks like it's mostly animal based studies, so like lab rats. So we don't really know just yet how effective and how potentially safe these things are in the long-term use or even short-term use for humans, because we don't want to obviously test out things on humans and put them at risk for anything. But that could be an approach as well. And then the bottom two things, again, a little bit more newer. These things might not be covered by insurance, by the way, as well. Things like stem cell treatments and PRP or platelet rich plasma, where you're getting injected with something that kind of replaces or is in addition to what you already have in your body. So some of these things are going to be a little bit fringe maybe for right now, that you could talk to some of your healthcare providers if you are currently undergoing any kind of chronic inflammation. All right, let's get to it. Here are this is in my wheelhouse now. Finally, right? We get to the part of like natural remedies and things that are food related for helping with alleviate any of your chronic inflammation potentially. So some of these things, the language that you see on here, you might be familiar with, like turmeric. Turmeric is a root. It can be, it's like a very yellow, it stains a lot of stuff. Turmeric is a root that you can pulverize and ground. Some people put it in their tea. Some people add it to other things that they eat. Some people actually shape it up like a piece of ginger. Ginger, I think, is also on here too. Cinnamon comes up a lot also as an anti-inflammatory. And again, even though these are natural products, these are natural remedies, either in their whole forms like bell pepper or in their phytochemical form, these antioxidant chemical substances like something called capsaicin, which is the chemical found in things like peppers. Be careful too, because how much is too much of anything includes things like natural products as well. So these things could exacerbate some conditions. They could interact with some medicines that you might already be taking. If you're pregnant or expect to be pregnant, these are also things that you might want to just double check. Let's see if anybody wants to chime in the chat. Any of these things look familiar? Like, do you know where bromelain comes from? Bottom left. Do you know where resveratrol comes from? These are, again, the phytochemicals, the naturally occurring chemical substances that are found in our plant foods. And if not, I can share with you, bromelain is an enzyme, a phytochemical found within pineapple. Resveratrol is found inside the skin of red grapes. This is also why it's thought of to have, right, the anti-inflammatory characteristics that it has. It's thought of to be related to reducing inflammation. And that's why we kind of say maybe red wine is good for you, but sometimes it's not. And again, the grape itself with the skin on is probably the way that I would go versus downing a bottle of red wine every week. I would rather just eat the grapes. Okay, so moving on into how this all comes about, I'm hoping to share with you some visual images here where maybe small little changes, right? You can add some of these foods to your already existing diet if you have the means and ability to do so. And honestly, I've got to say this out loud, right? I'm a dietitian. I also have a culinary background. I hate cooking for myself. Like, I just don't do it anymore as much as I used to. I feel like I don't have the time, but I also don't make the time for it. So I very much try to find ways that I can make things convenient for myself. So I will buy a bag of raw spinach. I will buy pre-grilled salmon steaks. I will buy a can of already cooked beans because I'm not sitting there soaking and draining and soaking and draining and putting them in a cooker. I just don't have the time to do that. So I'll find ways to bring in more convenient items. Again, some of these might not be so budget friendly, like a cooked chicken, right? Somebody is doing that for you versus you buying a package of raw whole chicken that you're doing yourself. So again, depending on your budget, your time, whatever your schedule allows. But look at from left to right. And I borrowed these from eatingwell.com in case you want to go check out any, just literally type in eatingwell.com anti-inflammatory foods or recipes, and a lot of great inspiration comes up. And some of these are really easy. Left-hand side, spinach salad, sweet potatoes, and then you throw some white beans on there, right? You get fiber, all different kinds of colors coming in, representing different kinds of phytochemicals and antioxidants to help you fight that inflammation. That middle section there with the rosemary crusted or the walnut. So you have the walnuts and you have the rosemary. So that's a plant food as well. And then you have the salmon. So you're bringing in some good healthy fats. You're bringing in some of those really nice deeply colored green type of foods as well, which have chlorophyll in them that help with helping your body detoxify. On the right hand side, you have kind of like a curry potato soup as well. I think that's cauliflower in there as well. Next up, we have lentils. So lentils, legumes, very fibrous foods, helping with managing our blood sugar and our gastrointestinal tract. Middle section there, that's a turmeric latte. You can get that for probably $16 at Starbucks, or you can just make it for yourself for the low price of about $1.50 in your house. Is it a pungent? It's a bit of a pungent flavor. If you're not used to the flavor, it can be a little bit pungent and tricky. When you're dealing with turmeric, though, the secret trick there is to add a little bit of ground black pepper. It actually happens to enhance and extract the potency of the anti-inflammatory properties of turmeric. So you can make yourself a latte or add it to a dish of some sort. And then on the right hand side, you have like a blueberry chia pudding. So again, vibrantly colored fruits and vegetables, a lot of variety in here too. So if you're not somebody who likes to make things from scratch, maybe this is just giving you some inspiration and ideas of things that you can fit into your diet on a day-to-day or week-by-week basis. So I'm going to let you kind of soak all this in and ask you, based on a lot of the stuff that we just discussed and went through, and especially since, I started the conversation with let's do a mid-year check-in, these are the three things I want you to keep in mind, right? What do you feel like you want to start doing to help support your immune system and maybe reduce your risk of any chronic inflammation that is due to come later in your years, or if you're dealing with something right now? What do you think is working for you that you want to keep doing? Right. So maybe you recently quit smoking and that's something that you really feel good about. Maybe you're exercising regularly and that's something you want to continue doing. And on the right hand side, what are something that you think you might want to stop doing? Like things that are no longer serving you, things that might be detracting from your health pursuits or your wellness pursuits, or not letting you manage a chronic condition in the way that you think is most appropriate. You don't have to share it with me here if you don't want to. If you want to, you can, but you don't have to. But think about things like that too. That's kind of how I approach things as well. When I learn information, I kind of weigh out the options of what's realistic, what's feasible, what is something that is sustainable as well. Like, can I keep doing something over and over again, or is it going to be one and done and it's just not realistic for me to keep up? And how does this affect everything? I cannot strip clean every single thing from my diet, and I cannot add in every single quote unquote healthy thing to my lifestyle because it's not feasible for me to do that. There's definitely things I'm going to continue to want to enjoy, like having a sweet treat, or I don't drink alcohol, but I would love to have, a cookie every now and then without feeling guilty. And so, allowing yourself flexibility, balance. Obviously, you're the best person to decide about your own health if you are able to do so, if you have the means to do so, the determinants of health, if you are aware of what is going on and the choices that you're making, you can say, I'm no longer happy doing this, or I want to start doing this instead. And then hopefully find the resources that support you on that next step of your journey towards more optimal health, but also allowing yourself the balance to have, because again, we can't be super perfect. It's progress, not perfection, as we like to say. All right, so let's wrap up. I have a couple more minutes to spare here before I have to launch off into something else. First of all, thank you to those of you who joined live. I always appreciate having an audience here, but if you did not join live and you're watching the recording, that is totally fine too. I always say sign up and you get the link later and watch it at your own time. If you never signed up, in a couple of months, I always make these webinars available on the Dish with Dina YouTube channel. So you are going to get a link to say thank you for joining today. It'll have a survey on there, and you can come and join us again for our next month's discussion, which will take place on Thursday, August 8th. And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about macronutrients, micronutrients, and food groups, and talk about the distinction of those as well. Okay, I see a chat here in here, so I appreciate that. And do I have one more slide? Oh, my references slide. So these are also some things that I pulled up as far as research is concerned, in case anybody's interested in any of that. So on that note, my friends, thanks so much for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or open up your microphone. I'll try to take that into account in like the next 1 or 2 minutes. If not, I will see you again, hopefully in next month or one of the future webinars. Thanks again for joining, everybody. Bye.